I'll be completely honest with you. If I didn't get my American citizenship, I don't know that I'd be here today, because life in Nova Scotia became that unbearable, and that's hard to say, but I'm sure your listeners need to hear the reality of that.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to Trauma, Training and Transformation, the podcast where we explore how movement heals the mind. Each week I talk to individuals of their own levels of adversity, lived experience, be it army veterans, researchers, sport athletes, or people who've gone through a level of adversity that has challenged them both physically and mentally. It can be a pathway to healing, resilience, identity, and hope. Together we explore the powerful relationship between physical activity, mental health, performance, trauma, and human resilience. And today's guest knows exactly everything about adversity and what it means to start over. Alex Thompson built a successful fitness industry in Nova Scotia before moving to Arizona, and that wasn't without its own challenges. And between those times, he went through a level of adversity second to none. He had to make a bold decision to leave Canada, move to Arizona, and rebuild his life from the ground up. Today, we explore what happens when your identity is stripped away, how movement can become an anchor during uncertainty, and why resilience isn't about never failing, it's about finding the courage to keep moving forward. Alex, thank you for joining us today. Welcome to Trauma, Training and Transformation. And for the benefit of our audience, please introduce yourself.
Thank you, James. Thanks for having me on today. My name's Alex Thompson. I'm originally from Australia. I lived there for the first 13 years of my life before my mum moved my family to Halifax, Nova Scotia. Finished high school there, played rugby, went to university, started a gym there, and within the last 2 years, I found out apparently I've always been an American since birth as well, and I moved recently to Arizona.
Thank you very much for sharing that, Alex. So before you became a coach or business owner, what was Alex like growing up in Nova Scotia?
Man, Nova Scotia I moved from the only country I knew at 13, and being at 13, the, sort of chubby kid with the funny voice in a new country, you were picked on a little bit, right? Found it hard to sort of fit in, didn't really, find anywhere where I felt I belonged as a young teenager until I started trying to play rugby again in high school. So it was up until having done that and starting to go to the gym and sort of find my own way, it was tricky, for sure.
We're from an Australian background where, sports like rugby, cricket, Aussie reels are quite, famous in that country. To come into Nova Scotia where the sports are typically winter sports, with hockey being huge, what was it like to transition to sport and then pick rugby up?
Well, picking rugby up was easy because I'd played that, since I was 8 in Australia. Granted, it was rugby league, not rugby union. There is a bit of a difference. Having now played both, I definitely prefer union. But, I couldn't skate, man. So, like, all the kids and friends of mine, my age, were like, oh, come play hockey, come do this, come whatever. And it just looked like, an elephant on skates. I couldn't do anything. It's horrible. I could snowboard. That was a little bit of fun. But aside from that, like, I just wanted to stick with what I was good at so that I didn't embarrass myself.
When you look back growing up, you mentioned about your situation moving from Australia to Nova Scotia. Was movement a big part of your life when you moved here? And when you look at how movement is in the round, what experience with movement helped shape you as an individual?
Man, I mean, having played rugby since I was a kid, there was always some sort of, movement exercise involved in what I was doing. It really sort of took off for me when I was in 10th grade, started going to the gym on my own, started strength training, wanted to make sure that, for the purposes of getting acknowledged as being a better, stronger, fitter rugby player, working towards university scholarships, which I ended up getting, which is great. It was something that I had to fight really hard in my own life to sort of chase after. Neither of my parents have ever worked out. Knowing the benefits of what that would do for me was something I had to pursue entirely on my own. So that was, again, probably the early beginning of why I've been as good at dealing with changes and challenges for the last couple of years that I have been, is that any goal I had, it was, all right, well, if I'm serious enough about it, I'm the only one pushing me in that direction. So
very much so. And I've been very fortunate to work with you during your younger development as a rugby player. And I was always impressed by your never quit attitude and how you shared that with your peers within the U23 setup for one thing. I always found that you was always driven as a player. Did that help you become more driven, or was it more the fact that you come from a background that wasn't fitness orientated. You had that self drive to become more fitness aware.
I think it was more of a self-drive. Ever since I was a young kid, picked on a lot, bullied a lot. I decided at a very young age that I didn't want to let what other people said or thought about me define what I do, right? I'm going to set up after my goals. I'm going to do this. It doesn't really matter what other people think. People talk all the time. It's fine, right? And I think that's sort of what drove that because, in every aspect of whether it's been sports, weightlifting, mixed martial arts, more recently, rugby, business, essentially, especially as well, I've always had people talking against me and doubting me just because, and that never really sat well with me. I'm like, well, the cocky attitude of me is like, all right, well, I'm going to show you, right? And this is where it's going to go. So I think that came more from having faced adversity at a young age and being like, no, this is not something I'm willing to accept. So
you accept though that the fitness element, yes, you saw the obvious signs physically and physiologically, but what did it give you psychologically growing up?
That gave me a way of sort of venting, right? And that can be healthy, it can be unhealthy. It sort of depends on how you filter that through. But, getting bullied a lot when I moved here and starting to go to the gym and going into sports and getting better at just moving in general, becoming a personal trainer, like just every journey along, I guess, like my movement journey, right, has been a way of me taking what I'm dealing with mentally and turning it into something productive, whether that's productive towards a goal, whether that's productive in that I'm just getting fitter and healthier, getting stronger, getting bigger, that really sort of fueled that.
So coming from being an athlete growing up, did you ever imagine going into coaching? And did you see that as possibly being your future career?
Honestly, no. From a young age, I had people talking to me when I started going to the gym, doing weights. Like I was one of the first people on my high school rugby team once I hit the senior level that was, actually going to the gym and training for a purpose of sport, until we had some of the football guys transition over and they wanted to play as well, right? But I was the only guy making my own workouts, doing my own programming, looking at my own food and nutrition and sort of trying to figure that out on my own rather than having anybody else's help. And when some of the other teammates of mine or even coaches I had started asking me about, hey, like this is working for you, can you share it with the class kind of deal? Up until almost a bit of a desperate moment through adversity, actually, I'd never seen myself as a personal trainer. All through high school, I worked at Good Life Fitness and was one of the guys that worked the front desk, change the towels, clean everything, do all the membership questions, whatever. And at the time, I looked at personal trainers and went, oh, well, they must know a lot and they must have to do a lot and they must be really smart. And sad as it sounds, that couldn't have been further from the truth, So after I went to university for a short time, did one semester there, played rugby for St. Thomas University, decided that program wasn't for me, came back, was living with my parents, and I was like, all right, well, I've got to get a job. I don't like living at home. I need money. What can I do? So I went back to one of the gyms I used to work at, and they basically were like, you can either sell memberships or you can be a personal trainer. And I went, well, I'm not going to be one of those guys that's annoying people for leads and names and numbers to give away a free branded t-shirt at the front desk. Everybody hates those guys, so I'm good. Let me try and be a personal trainer, see what happens with that. And then, one thing led to another. I did really well with every course I took and started getting clients, started helping people, making sales. And once that started to take off as well as it did, that's when I was like, wow, okay, like there's a future here for me in coaching because I can get people.
That led you to your next evolution individually. And, Aussie Fit, it wasn't simply opening a gym for you because it was an evolution of your desire to help people as well, growing as an individual. It was building something that reflected your personal values. So what did that business represent to you and for you?
So you got to remember, Aussie Fit started off in end of October, beginning of November of 2020. And if you think back to that time in Nova Scotia, that was about a week before we went into our second lockdown, total shutdown of the province from COVID-19 at that time. The whole point of me starting my gym obviously was to help other people, but I had a lot of clients and business clients who were pretty fed up with how Good Life was doing things, especially through COVID and, the beliefs we had, I had clients I was training to walk again who had multiple sclerosis that the gym wouldn't let me stand near in case he fell. Like, do you know what I mean? I'm like, that became a safety problem. And I was like, well, I can't give my service if you're not going to allow me to, meanwhile, While at the time, the province was open and nobody cared what you were doing, right? I could go sweat, bleed, and spin on someone in my MMA gym and it was fine. But my company wouldn't let me near my clients. So I'm like, this is a little backwards. Having opened a gym at that time and trying to keep it going, trying to keep it moving, it became a value system based on something is always going to try to stop you, or me in that case, right? And, a lot of people in their own fitness and movement journey, it's the same thing. There's always something that could stop them if they allow it to and don't really try to see their way around or through that problem. So with me running my business in that regard, that was one of my philosophies for coaching, right? Is, as long as you keep pursuing the goal, regardless of what comes up, because I dealt with people who are dealing with adverse medical conditions and nervous system conditions that they're never going to get rid of. People that have a loss in their family or, single mothers or single parents with kids that they need to look after. Other people that own businesses that, a lot of their time and attention has to go to that. So, but, the goal always has to be bigger than your excuse. And that became how I grew Aussie Fit as fast as I did and what I started to preach towards my clients to get them where they needed to be as well.
So would you say that your clients shaped you just as much as you helped to shape them?
I believe so, yeah. Because at the end of the day, the gym wouldn't have done as well as it did up until its downfall without the support of my clients understanding that, like it almost became not quite a communal concept, but sort of, in that, like, I had a lot of business clients that taught me a lot of business concepts. Like, this is what you do. This is, balance sheets and numbers and all of the business stuff that I didn't know because I didn't go to university for business. But then as wealthy and smart as all of these business clients of mine were that were paying me, they didn't know anything about how to get abs, how to increase the strength, how to increase the muscle mass, how to deal with stress and the impacts of that on the brain and the body. Because these are some of the most stressed out individuals ever. You ever met a rich guy who's always working? The cortisol level on that guy is enormous, right? And, you see it a lot now in even these like business celebrities talking about how to live healthier for longer so that they get to spend the money they're making, right? Well, I figured out very quickly and young a lot of those pieces of the puzzle, and that's what my clients were looking for. So it became they're helping me get better at providing what I know so that they can continue to get what I know. Does that make sense?
Very much so, and the community that you help to create can only be benefited by your experience and your sharing of that knowledge by them participating in the development both of the gym community but also buying into your vision. You mentioned there about opening your gym and it being around COVID. COVID challenged a lot of business, and especially around the world, but fitness industry was massively impacted. Can you take us back to what that period was really like for you?
It depends. Is the government of Nova Scotia going to watch this podcast? Jokes aside, I wasn't allowed to operate. And thankfully, I had a subset of clients and current customers from Good Life when I left and opened my gym that were like, well, our choices are we can train with you low-key illegally per the government regulations, or we get fat. Then we already are. That's exactly what I had one of my clients say to me at one point. He was like, look, I don't care. I will pay you what you want. I want to stay open. This is the most momentum I've had in the last, 6 years working on this. What are we going to do? So, there's a lot of stress for a little bit. At that time when I opened, I was renting space out of the first MMA gym that I was training at for me as a mixed martial artist. So it was, I remember he had like paper on some of the front windows. So, if the police came by, we couldn't tell that anybody was in there training or whatever, right? And, it was fine because we were one-on-one training. It wasn't like I had a big group of 50 people in there doing whatever, right? And, this is one thing that, I'll try not to divulge into politics, but that's one thing I think a lot of the world messed up with COVID is they ruined an entire generation of people mentally because you had no outlet outside of your house, right? Like you get confined to a single space. It's the same reason prisons use solitary confinement to punish people. If you've got nothing to do, you're going to go stir crazy. And the cortisol levels in the body rise, your body's going to feel the impact of that. And I wasn't willing to, number one, let my brand new business die after the tens of thousands I just invested in equipment and space, but also to let my clients who trusted me to keep them healthy revert after all the work we've been putting in. Shortly after that, it was early 2021. I had made enough money in those couple months towards the end of 2020 to take over a new commercial space. So I did. And that was a lot better because even when we went into lockdowns at that point, because I'm not just a personal trainer, I do what's called fascia stretch therapy. So it's, deep treatment of the joints, the body, which makes me a little bit different to just a regular personal trainer. And thankfully, by the third lockdown, they had designated that chiropractors, massage therapists, certain modalities in that regard could stay open. And it's interesting because, so I was a little paranoid because I'm like, yeah, I'm a gym, but I also do this. So it's, and it was funny because there's a girl I went to high school with who didn't like me very much. And she worked at the nail salon literally down the hall from the gym. And after that third lockdown was announced, she called the police on me. And so Halifax police show up. I'm training my landlord client's kids at that time of the commercial building. And the police come in and he's like, you got to come out and talk to these guys. And they were trying to shut me down. And I told them I had to pull up the little COVID release note on my phone. I'm like, no, I fit into this category and here's what I do. And they came in and looked around and checked this stuff. And they're like, oh yeah, no, okay, you can stay open. So, you're in this constant fight or flight for, I need to make money so I can afford to eat groceries, pay my rent, pay my bills. I need to keep my clients moving so that they don't revert and it makes my job harder later and they don't cancel their training. And I need to make sure I can make enough money to keep my business alive right now because, most businesses fail within their first 2 to 3 years. And I didn't want to be another statistic like that.
You must have been under incredible pressure with starting a new business. Some pressures are obvious and they can be visibly show signs, but you must have been carrying pressures that weren't visible to everybody else. So what was your biggest
100%.
fear that you live in?
I mean, after COVID, COVID, it for me specifically came with so much different pressure. Because at the time I just opened a new business, but I was also chasing a career in mixed martial arts. My first fight was supposed to be scheduled for January 2020. I made weight, showed up. My opponent didn't even show up to the weigh-ins. So, I spent COVID not only trying to keep the business open, but me and my coaches at the time were training for fight camps that would get announced for the next event. I'm scheduled to fight 3-6 months out, whatever. And then 2 weeks before the event, they'd have to cancel it per, government rules around COVID. So, my body and brain around just the business being in fight or flight mode. We're also in fight or flight because I was consistently trying to train fight camps and diet and be under that stress all at the same time, which, as horrible as that was, once again, I'm thankful that happened because it helped me deal with, I'm sure what we're going to talk about here shortly as well. The whole last 5 years for me has been different adversities in different areas, but without the experience of having gone through one, going through the next would have been significantly harder, right? So then with keeping the gym going, it became try to train, try to get my MMA fights, because the entire time I had my business, I was also trying to get MMA fights, trying to build a career in a different sport, trying to do that, under immense pressure, just in what that does to somebody, right? If you're not used to it. So it was interesting in that regard, for sure.
And that adversity that you had to live through from day to day with both COVID and trying to be an MMA fighter, it must have been very challenging both on your physical but mental well-being. But when you realised you got to a point where the business wasn't going to survive, what was happening emotionally behind the scenes for you?
Man, see, here's the sad reality of it is prior to having left an abusive relationship with my former partner, very physically abusive relationship, and the lies that person pushed forward, as well as some of the other people that surrounded my business, the gym was doing very, very well. I had gone from my first ever month of revenue in 2020 with being just under $5,000 Canadian to bringing in about $300,000 a year in 2023. That was my peak. That was phenomenal. Within the next 12 months, the gym was at negative profits. So very, very quickly what happened was, because of the lies that were pressed, and there's several Supreme Court actions right now dealing with all of this, my reputation took a hit. My capability of dealing with the adversity to keep the business rolling took a hit, because at that point it became not just a, how do I keep my gym going? How do I keep my fights going? It became, how do I keep myself alive? As depressive as that sounds, there became a point where I didn't feel safe living in Nova Scotia anymore because of lies that were being told and what was happening behind closed doors. There became a point where going to work just wasn't healthy on my head, which is not a great place to be if, you don't get paid unless you show up, right? And it's your business, So the adversity there became, what do I need to do to heal? And I struggled with the fact that I had been, especially 2023, man, 2023 was my peak. I had 2 MMA fights that year. I was doing really, really well training wise. I won the fight, revenue was at a high. Everything was great. right? Had my Jeep, my Huskies, it was perfect, right? And then it all came crashing down very, very quickly. So for the next year and a half, I struggled with, well, why am I not at that peak still? Like something must be wrong with me because I can't hit that again right now, right? And I struggled with it for a while. And then I was having a conversation, funnily enough, driving across the States on my first road trip here with my mother, explaining that, in an MMA fight or a rugby game, you get hit in the head, you're concussed. What happens? You have to take time off. You have to let the brain heal. You have to let that happen. What the world doesn't seem to push to the same extent is that if you have some sort of really big mental trauma, you need to do the same thing, because it would be like getting concussed and then trying to go to a rugby practice of full contact the next day. It's not healthy on the body or the brain, and it's actually going to be very, very counterproductive to just stopping and letting yourself heal. And the way I was dealing with my mental health at that time was trying to go back to that peak state of just go, 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 100%. And, in doing that, it messed up a lot of the momentum that I could have built had I just stopped and tried to look after myself. So
during that difficult period of your life, did you feel like you'd lost part of yourself, trying to cope, trying to survive?
100%. Now, I'll be honest with you in that during that really tricky period, so a couple of things went really well for me. I tried to run the gym remotely for a while, which was working. Then I had somebody who was supposed to rent it out, didn't end up paying the rent, sued him since for the rent. It's fine, we'll get that. But the goal was trying to travel through the States as much as I could while keeping the gym running remotely, training my clients via Zoom, having other employees train my clients, etc. Thankfully, I was able to spend as much time in Arizona as I did. And honestly, man, like even since my first trip here, it was, okay, this is home. Like, how do I figure out how to move here? Doing all the stuff I do now and today that I've built now my new business around that's doing really well, that really sort of, it became almost like an identity transition period where, okay, what I was chasing has now been ruined by others. Doesn't really matter what I do to try to get that back. It's not going to happen. So what do I want to do? Instead of trying to fulfill the expectations of others, what am I going to work for to create what I want for me? And that became the Jeep cowboy super American persona that I seem to be doing really well with right now. And that became a new business where I take my Jeep out and I take tourists out into the desert. I do all kinds of long distance tours across the state. I've got one coming up in October. I've got a gentleman from Texas wants me to guide him and his Jeep with his wife through most of the southwest of Utah and Arizona, which is awesome, but there wasn't really a way for me to get that back. It became okay, that's gone and died. What's the next part of my life look like? What do I want to do? And having learned on one of my trips that I've been American since I was born because my mom was born in the States, and regardless of what she told me growing up, she had, in fact, lived here long enough as an infant for her kids to be citizens. The second I got that U.S. passport, man, it became a woo, free bird, super American, I'm going there, this is what I'm doing, because that's my new identity now. And that's the place where I've felt the happiest. There's nothing here that can hurt me the way that I was hurt by others in Nova Scotia. And they can't take this away from me. That passport's ironclad, man. It doesn't matter what you do, that's mine. You can't take it. So this has been my new transition into life.
That's incredible, and I do appreciate you sharing that with us today, Alex. Many people listening to this podcast have experienced losing something that defined them. Be it a career, relationship, serving in the military, emergency services, or owning their own business, like in your case. But how did movement help you navigate that period of your life?
Well, it became, I guess, as I mentioned early on, like movement and working towards my own physical goals, whether that was a physique goal or a sport goal, became the way to deal with the adversity I was dealing with at the time, especially from like 15 to 19. Right. As I got older, movement became more of like my identity and what I do is coaching and a job in the gym, et cetera, et cetera. It fueled me knowing that, okay, this is what helps when I'm in crisis. Right. And rather than, going and drinking a bunch of beer, smoking, whatever it is, any of these unhealthier sort of coping mechanisms that people use, right? Movement was always mine where I was like, okay, there's always something I can work towards, right? You could be the strongest man in the world. You should still be trying to push towards that heavier weight. right? And people do. You see this in athleticism, different sports all the time. There's always someone trying to push the envelope a little bit. And for me, it became, all right, well, how do I push my own envelope? What else can I work towards with this goal? And without having a goal to chase, and you see this in people day to day, right? The people that do the worst in life and are in the lowest places are there primarily because they don't have a goal to chase, right? If you're working towards something actively and actually working on that day to day to day, you can't be in a bad spot in your life, right? It's just not going to happen. You've got the mentality to get yourself out of whatever it is you're dealing with. And because I knew that everything for me was going as bad as it was, that became my next goal was, okay, well, let me focus on what I can control. Let me work on what I can work on. Let me push for the extra goal with this aspect because I can't do it with the other stuff right now. So, movement, weights, training. I was training with the professional MMA team here at the MMA lab among UFC fighters for quite a few months. There was always someone or something to push me further than what I was doing at the time. And don't get me wrong, those UFC guys kicked crap out of me over and over and over again. That was not super fun. That was very humbling, right? But, the goal with that still being, all right, well, I can work towards that, right? And that was the same with weights and lifting weights. It was the same with running. It was the same with, now it's working towards beating first responder physical tests for some goals I have later this year, and making sure that my breathing and lungs are in the best capability that they can be for that job, So with movement and the goals that I had surrounding movement, that became one of the reasons it was so good for keeping me moving towards or away rather from all the adversity and just sitting there getting stuck in my head about where I was.
After all those challenges in Nova Scotia and after your initial visit to Arizona, you then made the big decision to leave Nova Scotia for good and start again in Arizona. That's a huge life change for anybody, really. And you mentioned there about the great news of finding out that you were able to become an American citizen because of your mum. What was that like? And were you excited? Or was the level of terror in that making that decision?
There was a little bit of both. The biggest, the best way to explain it was very much a fuck it kind of decision. Like, my life is as bad right now as it could be because of reputational issues, false criminal charges, which are now gone, by the way, so, which is great. The business falling apart, a lot of different things. And it became I at least enjoy my mental space being here in America. I can go shoot guns on the weekend and have fun doing that. Like, there was a lot of things where I'm like, if that's as bad as my new life is going to be, it's better than where I'm at right now, right? So it was a bit of a gamble and a chance. At the time, I had some UFC clients that were seeing me for fascia stretch therapy. Jared Cannonier, number 7 middleweight in the world in the UFC, had enlisted me for 2 of his fight camps in part of before I moved and then after I moved for 1 each. I had some other clients in the UFC. So I had money coming in, which helped me feel better about, okay, well, I can at least survive here, right? I live with my fiance. It was tricky in that I knew how much moving from Australia to Canada sucked and impacted my social life and being able to make friends and losing what I lost and whatever. But, it's interesting because I live in a city called Phoenix, Arizona, right? And for a phoenix to rise, it must first burn and die, right? That's the whole analogy of the mythical creature, the phoenix, right? And what I realized, and what I've really realized in the last 12 months specifically, is because of what the people that ruined my life in Nova Scotia, ruined my business in Nova Scotia did, and how far that spread, how quickly that spread, everything there was already dead. I wasn't really losing anything there that wasn't already gone. Even just living here now, and it's not a complaint, it's just a realization. Very few people check in on me. Very few friends, rugby associates, old teammates, old clients, very few people check in on me. And that's fine. I'm not here to be babysat. I don't need anybody being like, oh, every day, how's Alex doing? But it's more of that gave me I don't need to worry about anybody else to chase what I want to chase. So that was a really big realization. Yeah.
Hi everyone. If the conversation with Alex resonates with you, do me a favor, like, subscribe, and share this conversation with someone that you believe will benefit from listening to it. It makes a big difference both for the channel, but equally for the wider community who are dealing with their own issues with mental health. Alex, you touched on a lot of areas there, and it's great to know that you've put all those negatives associated to your time in Nova Scotia, but your move to Arizona has been huge and must have had both a positive and humbling effect on you. So what does starting again teach you about Alex?
My capability of versatility and working against everything that's against me. I will put it this way. I had a new business concept come into my play here about 5 months after I officially moved back, and that was the Jeep tour business, right? Because that's what I've been doing for years with my dogs and my drone and my Jeep. We go explore the trails, and that was part of driving all across America and doing all of that. And I had a client of mine who's actually in the NFL who was working on them, fixing them up, and he had said, he's like, why don't you throw it on Airbnb Experience that you can take people out and do that and see where it goes? And I was like, yeah, I could try. We'll see what happens. Well, within about 2 weeks of having done that, I'm getting 5 to 6 tour bookings a week of people wanting to come and see and do that. And, new businesses don't take off very, very quickly like that, especially if they don't have investors or capital and it's just one guy running it. Right. The fact that that took off as much as it did and the reviews that I'm getting from guests about that make it less about the tour and more about what I'm providing them. Right. A lot of them talk about, oh, Alex has this incredible story. Alex is this, Alex is that, the dogs are this, whatever. People care more about what I'm able to leave them with from my story than they do about going out and seeing the cactuses and the lakes and the desert, right? That's what I'm taking away from this new business idea. So, being able to move here and use what I've dealt with as a fuel to help others in their lives, motivate them, give them a great experience in what I think is the best part of the country is super, super motivational for me to keep moving towards other goals.
And I appreciate you sharing that. I mean, one of the reasons of creating this podcast was to share both powerful and personal stories of people who have gone through adversity in any kind of environment, really, and are willing to share it with others so they can learn through your experiences. And I'm humbled listening to what you've gone through and you've got on the other side of that. When you look back now of all the experiences along your journey, was rebuilding yourself physically easier than rebuilding yourself mentally?
100%, 100%. The physical stuff is usually a lot more in somebody's control, right? Unless you're that far gone and that far depressed, which, I'm sure a lot of the people, like myself included, and a lot of the people listening have been, it's easier for me to control what I do or don't eat or do or don't drink or getting up and moving around than it is what my brain's trying to do to trick me that day into staying in a bad place. Right. And a lot of the time, you can't necessarily control the mental cues you're going to get from something as much as you can the physical. Right. So let me give you a couple examples here. My ex was very violent. This woman tried 3 times to severely injure and or kill me. And that became what started a lot of what we talked about today. Going back into MMA training, you spar with whoever's there. So sometimes there'd be a lady there. For a female fighter who wants to spar me. Given what I'd been through, there was a period of time there where that wasn't good on my brain. But that's more of a physical thing that I can distance myself from, right? Whereas a lot of the things that are going to affect your mentality, I could jump on Instagram or do what I'm trying to do for my new businesses, and all of a sudden I see something that's going to trigger my brain to put me back into a different state, right? Does that make sense? It's easier for me to avoid what I know physically is going to put me back somewhere I don't want to be mentally than it is for you to tune out the stuff that's going to affect your brain, because a lot of that becomes self-conscious, right? That could just be memories coming back. It could be a bad dream. It could be music, smells, sights, doesn't matter. You don't necessarily know what to avoid to keep your mentality in the place it needs to be. But there are other things I can avoid where I know I'm going to physically feel this way, so I'm going to stay away from that, right? It's a lot easier for you to control rebuilding your physicality too, because you just eat well, you sleep well, you drink well. Rebuilding the brain, man, like that's why we have psychologists. That's why they get paid what they get paid, is because that's a difficult task. Because even if I'm telling you to do the right things, it doesn't mean it's going to work for you right away. And then that discourages a lot of people. Same as what I found with personal training clients. Eat this, lift this, sleep this, do this. Okay, great. They do it for 3 days. Oh, it's not helping. Keep working at it, right? But that's a little bit easier for me to give to somebody else to do on their own and have them be in control of than for a psychologist to give someone a bunch of mental exercises to go, just feel better, it'll be fine. Well, the brain doesn't work like that, as I'm sure you're aware, right?
Well, you touched on several times now about how training physically and rebuilding your body often works on building your mental toughness. But equally, if you're struggling to cope with any kind of trauma cues or triggers associated around the trauma that you've been associated with, it can be very challenging. So what do you think actually changes psychologically then in your environment when people commit to consistent movement?
That's a good question. I mean, I think on a physical level, the connection between mind and body strengthens. That was something I learned very quickly with personal training is, once you get someone in who, let's say, has never, ever exercised with weights, right? First of all, if they're doing everything right, they're going to hit some amazing goals very, very quickly, right? Because the body wants to strengthen, it wants to grow muscle, all of these things, right? Some of the clients I had, a lot of them had never, let me think back to specifically, there was this high school girl. She was 15 when she started training with me. I think she was 18 when we finished. And she started seeing me. Her mom brought her in to see me because she had a lot of mental health issues in that she was super depressed. She was bullied. There was all of these things, right? And it was really, really sad because she's got a lot of cool goals. She's very smart, but she's, I don't want to eat. I don't want to get out of bed. I don't want to do all these things. Well, the second we started weight training, a lot of that began to change. Your brain starts to recognize what you are getting good at and what you are good at, and building strength within the body and resilience. And especially heavy strength training builds the nervous system response as well, as I'm sure you're aware. Right? The more I can lift, the heavier I can lift, the better my brain connects to my nerves throughout my entire body. When you start to do that, cortisol levels would decrease, your body gets stronger, your physique gets stronger, your confidence in how you look and feel gets stronger. It's hard for you to be in a bad mental state when that happens. So, in working towards a movement goal, you're going to have a whole lot of feedback towards your mental health. It just has to happen. That's how it works, right? Unfortunately, a lot of people get too bogged down in where their mental health is that they push off movement, that they push off working towards the physical goal. I'm too depressed to get up and walk today. I don't feel like going to the gym. I'm sad, right? And it's the same as, being hungover and having another drink. It's not helping you get better, even though it feels like it is for a slight moment, right? You're actually digging yourself into a deeper hole. And I really wish people thought about it more. Like I always tell my clients, I'm like, something is better than nothing. If you feel like that on those days, go outside, sit in the sun. That's going to help. May not feel like it is in the moment, but it will, right? Go for a walk. If you don't feel like going for your 5K run or going to your sparring training or your weightlifting trip, whatever it is, go for a walk outside. Get something moving, because just sitting there and letting the brain take over, if that's what it's doing, is so unhealthy, man. It's like sitting there smoking a pack of cigarettes, but people don't realize that because they don't see the effects of what doing that over and over and over again does until way later in time.
I totally agree. And often the average person who identifies exercise for one purpose may not see the natural connection to mental stability and mental emotional regulation. Those relationships between physical and mental well-being can help improve their own self-confidence and self-esteem so they can go on to improving themselves in the day-to-day life, but professionally or personal. In your background, you've worked with everyday people and elite performers. So what patterns do you see in the people that you work with who are carrying stress, anxiety, burnout, or just suffering with low confidence?
I mean, one of the biggest things you notice very quickly is, and a lot of trainers and coaches in general are really bad for this, is comparing the problems someone else is telling them about to the reality of how that coach or trainer would feel if that was their biggest problem in life right now, right? And I'll be honest with you, I was pretty bad at that early on in my career because, having to listen to some very wealthy client complain about just the stupidest little thing. And I'm sitting here going, bro, you're a millionaire. Like, what? Oh, lobster's too buttery. Oh, poor you. You know what I mean? But everyone's got a stress. And depending on where they're at on their, mental health journey, fitness journey, life journey, whatever you want to call it, it could be something super simple to you that's actually catastrophically detrimental to them because of what it's impacting, not because of what the problem itself is. Does that make sense? So I had, let me take you back to that student client of mine who was, the 16-year-old girl. She would say things like, oh, well, my friends gossip about me or people talk or whatever, right? And to her, that was creating a pattern of she wouldn't eat, She wouldn't get out of bed. She'd stress out of her mind. She couldn't sleep. Cortisol's through the roof. You're in that really bad downhill mental health spiral, right? But then for another one of my clients to get that, same impact from a problem, it would have to be something like, I lost $1 million in the business this year. I've got to fire 50 people from my company because we just have to. Like it became a different problem that created the same thing. So, it doesn't matter who the client is, who the person is, who the athlete is. Someone has or could have a problem that derails everything else, regardless of how big it may seem to other people. The pattern becomes, how do you train the same level of problem to be dealt with across the board to stop it being an impact, right? And that was one of the questions that I had early on as a trainer. And the answer's not, it's how long is a piece of string? Everybody's got a different way of doing it. I've got a whole book worth of ways that you can cope and deal with these things, right? But it's not a textbook version of, here's your exercise sheet, go home, do this, you'll be fine for everybody. Doesn't work that way. We're all different, right? So that was one of the biggest things I noticed, is that, rather than it being a pattern of the same issue, you see a pattern of the same symptoms because people aren't dealing with their problems, because their mental health and their stress levels are at the level that they are. Regardless of what the problem is that got them there, you could see people all across the board. Doesn't matter if it's a high school girl, a professional athlete in the UFC or the NFL, a businessman, a part-time worker who was, working 2 jobs to make sure they can train with me and get gains. It didn't matter. Everybody I've worked with at some point hits that wall, regardless of how big that problem seems to other people.
So what changes first in your athletes? Is it the body, the mind, their identity, or is it a combination of each client grows differently?
Each client grows differently, for sure. A lot of people, for a long time, my business was working with very, very wealthy people that felt they had the rest of the puzzle put together, except the health and fitness side. And then the more they started training the health and fitness side, the rest, they realized, wow, I don't have any of my stuff together here. We got to work on a lot of things, right? So I think what seems to happen most is people will start with a short term, let's say 4 to 6 weeks of training, a physiological and a mental difference. I have more energy. I look a little leaner in the mirror. I look bigger in the mirror. The slight goals that they're, working towards their greater goal at the end. But the more you start to train and the more you can develop a person, because as much as I was personally training these people, because I'm seeing them 3 to 5 hours a week, you almost become their therapist. I'm not going to say I was, because I don't have the degrees and whatever, but they treat you as such, right? You get to know them really well. You get to find out what their issues are, what they're dealing with, and work with that, right? So I think the more you can work with an athlete and mentor them rather than just put them through an exercise and diet program, the bigger changes you're going to see. Right? Because of my story and the things I've been through, a lot of people started to have these identity changes and change their ways and habits in several different aspects, right? So it becomes a question of, what is the person seeing in their own change at the beginning? Because even their goals will change, right? Like I've had people that had simple goals, like, I want to lose 5 pounds. All right, great. We've done that in 6 weeks. Now what? What's the next goal? Shit. Okay. I want to lift 500 pounds on a deadlift. All right, great. Let's work on it, right? People become more and more motivated. And that's one of the biggest things that you see change. If I can change someone's level of motivation, not with my goal being to do that, but it's a byproduct of putting them through the right program towards a goal. Their motivation increases. Their motivation changes. I've never, ever worked with a client who hit their goal that they first told me about on their original consultation and didn't want to work towards a new one. Never once in my now 10 years of personal training. Everyone always meets a goal and then has something further they want to work on, right? They're not just going to quit and sit there and be at what it is. So if someone's level of motivation changes, everything else does too. Goals, physiological, lifestyle, mental health, their capability of dealing with things, that becomes the fuel for more work.
A big part of that, both physically and mental growth of your clients, is your infectious personality and your knowledge that you share, be it your own personal journey or knowledge about the industry that you're providing your clients. You touched earlier on about fascia recovery and mobility. Do you think that we store stress physically within our bodies?
100%. And that's been proven in several different studies time and time again. It sounds very witchy-wishy, magic, whatever, right? But, you've done the programs and the degrees that right? The brain, the eyes visualize the stimulus, becomes internalized in the brain, brain stores it into a memory, right? Well, because the brain and the body are so interconnected through so many different systems, the body has to take some of that impact too. Now, in working with athletes or day-to-day people with fascia stretch therapy, you really start to notice that. I could be working on a client doing a treatment, and all of a sudden they start bursting out crying, right? Now, sometimes they know why. Other times they don't know why. It's not my position to ask or be told or whatever. If they want to talk about it, they can talk about it. That becomes an emotional release, right? Whether that's crying, sometimes it's hysterical laughing. And then they're sitting there going, what you're doing feels really great. I don't know why I'm laughing like I'm at a comedy improv club right now, but this is what I needed, apparently. Do you know what I mean? So, and you know, in my early days doing fascia stretch before I became a specialist in it, when they told us that this could happen at the course, I'm going, yeah, okay, sure, whatever. Yeah, sure. But then the first time it did happen with a client, and what she told me, it brought back up in her brain that I just let go of, made me realize, holy, like people really do store their deepest traumas or impactful memories in their physical tissue. And that can hold back a lot of physical movement patterns, a lot of mental issues, and keep you stressed and depressed, right? Like you can be working on all these things, but if your body is still holding that trauma, it's going to be a problem. And I'm sure you've seen this in like combat veterans, people that have seen active combat, for example. That's one where, you know, okay, clearly he's been through some stuff. He's going to have some issues, right? The brain gets dealt with a lot post-service by a lot of these institutions, like here in the States, it's Veteran Affairs. In Canada, same deal. I don't know what they have in the UK, but the organizations and the government groups that are supposed to help rehabilitate soldiers, for example, and veterans, focus more on the mental side of things than they do the physical, which I'm not saying is bad. Obviously, that's a big deal. But one can't get better without the other also being treated, at least long term, right? And I've seen that with the people I've worked with time and time again. I've experienced too much, and even in my own life, like you feel it, right? Like everyday listeners to your podcast right now, they could have a stressful day at work and they're going to look and feel like this. The shoulders are scrunched up to the neck. Everything's tight. You're going to get headaches and migraines. Like the body holds that impact. And unless you can treat both the brain and the body, usually with separate different modalities, but one can't get better and stay better without the other also being treated.
Completely correct. And I totally appreciate you sharing that. I mean, in the United Kingdom, we have the government with UK veterans, but mainly it's the Healthy Heroes and Combat Stress charities, as well as BLESMA for many veterans who have lost limbs through active service. And they're the ones really who are supporting veterans on their journey, but much more is needed to be done. We've talked a lot about how movement has taught you about being a human, but if you could sit down with a younger Alex, the one just beginning this journey, what would you tell him?
That's a good one. Probably something along the lines of don't give up. Don't let what happens around you and what other people say or do define what you do. And you know, that's something I've been telling myself for a long, long time. You know, I was bullied chronically in Australia when I was 5 or 6 and to a very, very bad mental health point at that time, you know, as such a young kid. And it's my whole life has been, you know, that on and off again from different people, different things, whether that was other kids at school, whether that was, you know, my commercial landlord and tenants in my business, ex-girlfriend, people around, whatever, right? There's always been something pushing me against what I know I'm supposed to work on, where I should be, what I should be doing, right? And even today, man, like having, like, I got Frank Magazine writing all these friendly articles about me in Halifax and trying to hate on me and all of this and that, right? There's always going to be a hater. And the way I'm dealing with that is, well, this is my life. You don't define me. Like, yeah, you know, people who hate and bully don't do it from being better than you, right? That's just not a thing, you know? There's an analogy I really like listening to. You've heard it in other podcasts and such, whatever, where, you know, eagles only get picked on by the crows until they can fly above them, right? The second that you're above what everyone else is thinking, saying, and doing to you, that can't affect you. It's just not going to happen, right? And that's what I'm living day to day now. People can say, do, think whatever they want. There's a whole lot of my story and what's going around publicly right now that no one's ever heard my side. I never had to testify in court, not yet. Maybe in the civil lawsuits, we'll see. But no one knows my story. I haven't been public about it, right? Losing the gym, ex-relationship, all of these things that have very much impacted my life and why I now live here. But people love to talk, especially in Halifax. Everyone gossips. It's ridiculous. I don't know what the culture is there or whatever it is, but you know, you see it in different jobs, sports, etc. Everyone loves to talk. but no one ever asked me what happened. No one, right? Anyone that didn't already know what happened because they were somewhat involved or knew me close enough that they found out, no one has ever asked me what happened. They just believe what they're told or what they read or what they talk about, right? And that hurts. But at the same time, having grown up the way I have, being used to that happening, learning to roll with the punches and deal with it, I've been through worse things in my life. And I'm sure there's going to be other difficult things that happen for the rest of my life. But I can't sit here and get bogged down at people doubting what I'm doing. And that would be what I would tell a younger version of me is don't you dare for a second ever doubt your own goals and capability. Chase after it because nobody else is going to care about it.
Alex, thank you very much for sharing that, but also that heartfelt message through that journey is important for everyone to hear. And many people listening today may feel overwhelmed or like you starting from scratch, challenged by that level of fear. What one piece of advice would you hope that they would take away from today's conversation?
Well, let's try not to be pessimistic about it. His life's always going to suck in one regard or another, right? As horrible as it sounds, it's the way of the world. What I would think people should take away from my story and me speaking today is no matter what level of issue you're dealing with or faced with, you have to want to find a way out, right? Like you work in mental health. You've talked to people who have been in really dark places in their life. But if you give in to those feelings, you can't get the help you're looking for, right? A lot of people, there's a statistic, I don't remember exactly what the percentage is, but most of people who have jumped off of bridges with the goal to end their life, who survive, have gone, holy shit, I wish I didn't try that, right? No one has ever gone, oh, it didn't work, I should do it again right now, right? Like that's not a thing. Everyone regrets it the second they try it. And especially with men, you've heard UFC fighters like Paddy Pimblett talk about this. Before one of his really big fights, one of his best friends passed away to suicide. I've been there mentally a lot. My entire life. But at the end of the day, I haven't let it define me, right? Gotten close, trust me. But it's not something that should be as easily given into because there's always something to work on. There's always something to improve in your life. And not that it's anybody's fault necessarily that they end up in this mental place, but the second you give in, the second you throw the towel in that cage fight is when you lose, right? If I throw the towel in on the fight, I can't pull it back out of the fight. I'm out. That's it. I lost. We're done. Right? You have to have the push to not want to do that. And I know that's hard. Trust me. I've been there. I've lived it over and over again. And especially in these last 2 years, man, like I'll be completely honest with you. If I didn't get my American citizenship, I don't know that I'd be here today because life in Nova Scotia became that unbearable, and that's hard to say, but I'm sure your listeners need to hear the reality of that. Like, yeah, I put off this great, big, incredible persona, this American, super cowboy, whatever. It's great. But it took a lot of mental battles for me to be able to get to here and to stay here. And I would hope that anybody listening who is dealing with a battle of harsh depression or thoughts of suicide or anything like that, regardless of whether you're completely alone in your life, in your journey, or whatever it is, whether you've got support, that you reach out to people, that you find help. There's a lot of great anonymous help sources nowadays as well, where you don't even have to identify yourself. You can just talk to somebody on a phone or on a text app or whatever. I would hope that people see themselves as worth more than just giving up.
Alex, I'm sure I speak for everyone who's listening. I'm really unhappy and glad that you are here today and that you're experiencing positive things moving into Arizona. The name of this podcast is Trauma, Training and Transformation. When you hear those three words together, what do they mean to you today?
They coincide, man. One leads into the next. I've had a very... life hasn't been easy ever, actually, at any point. Except 2023 was a peak year until everything went bad, but it has taken me, I turned 28 in September this year. It has taken me 27 years to finally find a place where I'm happy to exist day to day, right? And I still have my challenges here. I'm brand new in a country that, I've been building a business, building an income, working towards goals, fighting, false legal battles from another country, dealing with harassment in this country from the people still involved in that, and having had no one aside from my defense attorney and my family and very close friends, all three of them, believe my story. I've got the entire province of Nova Scotia against me with what's been put out publicly. And, having had that trauma to push me in training and, there's days where I'm like, man, I'm not feeling it, but I need to walk my dogs, right? I can't go to sparring today. I can't go do the extreme 2-3 hour workouts that I do twice a day some days because I just don't have that mental energy today. and that affects physical energy, right? But the thing is, something's better than nothing. And as long as you're using, and this is really hard to do, by the way, like anybody listening, like this is not something I'm like, oh, everybody should be able to do it. No. Sometimes you got to fight some hard battles to make it happen. But your desire to get away from your trauma can always be fueled by training. No one ever does a workout and goes, wow, I feel mentally worse right now because of that workout. It just doesn't happen. The endorphins that are released in the brain when you exercise, no matter what it is, it could be a walk, it could be a bag workout, it could be lifting weights, it doesn't matter. The endorphins that are released in the brain help change the way you're chemically working in your body for the better. Always. And, that becomes your transformation. As long as you can continue to repeat that pattern, you can get away from these traumas. You can push them further down. You can heal from them and let them go, right? And that's sort of where I'm at right now. I've got my name cleared. Things are starting to go my way again. The public at some point in the next 12 months is likely to find out the real story, right? And I'm able to now push that trauma away, heal from it, move on, focus on harder training, focus on new goals, transform myself into the first responder that I hope to be by January next year, who runs a side business, taking people out in the desert and showing them the best parts of the country with my dogs and my Jeep, but this is that transformation that came from me pushing through the traumas and refusing to give up and using my training and movement to make sure that my brain and body can get me to where I need to be.
Alex, thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing your story with such honesty. I think your journey is a powerful reminder that while we can't always control what happens to us, we can choose how we respond. And sometimes that response begins with taking one step, even small steps forward. If today's conversation resonated with you, please remember to like, subscribe, and share this episode and leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what stood out from today's conversation. You can continue to listen to this conversation on the podcast, and you can find this podcast on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you find your podcasts. You can also find this full episode on my YouTube channel, James Alder 003. I create a Substack each week, and that's on my Substack channel. Also, you can support this channel by buying me a coffee. All links are in the description box below. If you know someone who would benefit from hearing today's conversation, please share it with them, because you never know, one story, one conversation, or one moment of hope may change someone's life. Resilience isn't built when life is easy. It's built every time we choose to move forward, even when the path ahead is uncertain. Sometimes the strongest step we take isn't the fastest, it's simply the decision not to stand still. So until next time, thank you for listening to Trauma, Training and Transformation, the podcast where we explore how movement heals the mind. Please take care of yourself, keep moving, and I'll see you on the next episode.